The harmattan winds swept across the village of Kera, carrying with them the fine dust that turned the afternoon sky into a hazy, amber veil. Ibrahim Traoré stood at the edge of the military compound in Ouagadougou, his uniform bearing the insignia of a captain, though his responsibilities now extended far beyond what any captain's stripes could represent. The transition from leading artillery units to overseeing an entire nation's security had been swift, almost too swift. But the challenges facing Burkina Faso demanded immediate action. His mind drifted back to the reports that had been accumulating on his desk over the past 3 weeks. Villages in the western regions, particularly near the border areas, had reported unusual activities. Children playing near the old baobab trees had stumbled upon strange entrances hidden beneath vegetation and rocks. The initial reports seemed insignificant, just children's tales of secret hideouts and mysterious tunnels. But Ibrahim had learned long ago, during his geology studies at the University of Ouagadougou, that the most profound discoveries often began with the smallest observations. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Major Ouedraogo entered the office, carrying another stack of field reports. The major was a trusted officer, one of the few who had stood with Ibrahim during the difficult transition of power. His weathered face told stories of countless nights patrolling the northern regions, fighting against insurgents who threatened the nation's stability. Mr. President Ouedraogo corrected himself, still adjusting to the new reality. Ibrahim smiled slightly. He had insisted that close colleagues continue to use his military rank in private. It kept him grounded, reminded him of who he was before the weight of an entire nation rested on his shoulders. "What do the new reports say?" Ibrahim asked, gesturing for the major to take a seat. "More sightings near Tikando and Mognonrey. The local chiefs are concerned. They say their children have been warning them about strange men coming and going at odd hours, always near the old mining sites. The children claim to have followed them to hidden entrances." Ibrahim leaned forward, his geological training immediately connecting dots that others might miss. Tikando and Mognonrey, both villages, were situated in areas rich with gold deposits, both artisanal and industrial. The mention of hidden entrances near mining sites triggered something in his memory. During his university days, he had studied the ancient trade routes of West Africa, the paths that merchants had used for centuries to transport gold, ivory, and other precious resources across the Sahel. "Have we confirmed any of these entrances?" Ibrahim asked. "Not yet, sir. The areas are difficult to access, and with the security situation in some regions, our teams have been hesitant to investigate without proper authorization." Ibrahim stood and walked to the large map of Burkina Faso that dominated one wall of his office. His fingers traced the western border, following the routes that connected the mining regions to neighboring countries. The patterns were becoming clearer now. The missing gold that appeared in official reports, the discrepancies between production numbers and export records, the mysterious flows of wealth that seemed to evaporate before reaching national coffers, all of it could be connected. "Major, I want you to assemble a small team. Discreet, capable people who understand both security and geology. We're going to investigate these reports personally." Ouedraogo's eyes widened slightly. "Are you planning to go into the field yourself, sir?" "I'm a soldier first, Major, and if children can find these tunnels, then we can certainly follow their trail." As night fell over Ouagadougou, Ibrahim sat alone in his office, surrounded by maps, geological surveys and intelligence reports. The numbers told a devastating story. According to recent studies, Burkina Faso was losing billions of CFA francs annually to illicit gold flows. The precious metal that should have been funding schools, hospitals, and infrastructure was instead disappearing through shadowy networks that connected his nation to refineries in distant countries. He thought about the children who had first noticed something wrong. In their innocent play, they had done what trained observers had missed. They had paid attention to the small details, the inconsistencies in their familiar landscape. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important intelligence came from the most unexpected sources. Ibrahim pulled out a photograph from his desk drawer. It showed him as a young university student, holding a rock sample during a geological field trip. Back then, his dreams had been simpler: to understand the earth beneath his feet, to perhaps work in the mining sector, contributing to his nation's development. He never imagined that understanding rocks and minerals would become a weapon in fighting for his country's economic sovereignty. The phone on his desk rang, breaking his reverie. It was the Minister of Mines, calling with the latest production figures from the industrial mines. As Ibrahim listened to the numbers, his resolve hardened. Tomorrow he would begin the journey that would take him from the presidential office to the dusty villages where children played among secrets that adults had overlooked. The trail of stolen gold was about to be followed to its source, and whatever he found would determine the future course of his nation's fight for economic independence. Osterdi Chapter 2, Shadows in the West. The convoy left Ouagadougou before dawn, when the city still slumbered under a blanket of cool morning air. Ibrahim sat in the second vehicle, deliberately choosing not to travel in the lead car. Years of counter-terrorism operations had taught him that predictability was dangerous. Beside him, Major Ouedraogo reviewed satellite imagery on a tablet, marking locations where the children's reports had been most consistent. They were headed to the western province of Muhun, to a cluster of villages near Bondoukoui, ironically, the region where Ibrahim himself had been born. He knew these landscapes intimately, had played in similar fields as a child, had watched artisanal miners work the earth with tools that had changed little over generations, but he was returning now with different eyes, seeing patterns that his childhood innocence had missed. The journey took most of the morning, the paved roads eventually giving way to red dirt paths that wound between fields of millet and small compounds of traditional adobe houses. As they approached the first village, Ibrahim noticed the characteristic flat-roofed architecture of the Bobo people, the walls decorated with geometric patterns that held meanings passed down through centuries. The village chief, an elderly man named Amadou, greeted them with the traditional respect due to a head of state. But Ibrahim quickly asked to dispense with formalities. "I've come to learn, not to be honored," he explained in Moure, the lingua franca that connected Burkina Faso's diverse ethnic groups. "Your children have seen something important. I need to understand what they've discovered." Chief Amadou nodded, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "The young ones see things we adults have learned to ignore, Mr. President. Come, let me introduce you to some of them." 3 children were brought forward, 2 boys and a girl, ranging in age from perhaps 9 to 12 years old. They were initially shy, intimidated by the presence of soldiers and government officials. But when Ibrahim knelt down to their level, speaking to them in the warm, patient tone of someone who genuinely wanted to listen, their stories began to flow. The oldest boy, named Musa, explained how they had been playing near an old baobab tree about a kilometer from the village. "We pretend it's a fortress," he said, his hands gesturing excitedly. But one day, Fatima noticed that the rocks near the base of the tree looked different. Some of them were newer, not as weathered. Fatima, the girl, continued the story. "When we moved the rocks, we found an opening. It was dark inside, and we could hear water dripping. But the strange thing was the smell. It smelled like the mining site where my uncle works, that sharp smell of chemicals." Ibrahim and Ouedraogo exchanged glances. Mercury and cyanide, the chemicals commonly used in gold extraction, had distinctive odors. The fact that these children had noticed it suggested they had found something more than just a natural cave. "Did you go inside?" Ibrahim asked gently. The third child, a boy named Boubacar, shook his head vigorously. "No, sir, our parents taught us never to enter unknown caves, but we watched from hiding, and we saw men come at night. They carried heavy bags and lamps. They would go in empty and come out with the bags full." "How many times did you see this?" Major Ouedraogo asked. "Many times," Musa answered. "Maybe twice a week, sometimes more. Always at night, always the same men. They speak a language we don't understand well, not Moure or French, maybe Dioula or something else." Ibrahim stood, his mind already piecing together the implications. Dioula was commonly spoken along trading routes, particularly by merchants moving goods between countries. If the men operating these tunnels were speaking Dioula, it suggested a commercial operation, with connections beyond Burkina Faso's borders. "Can you show us where this baobab tree is?" Ibrahim asked. The children eagerly agreed, and within minutes, a smaller group was formed. Ibrahim, Ouedraogo, 2 security personnel, and the 3 children as guides. They left the vehicles behind and walked through the village's outskirts, passing fields where women worked with hoes, turning the earth in preparation for planting. The normalcy of village life continued around them, unaware that beneath their feet might lie a network stealing their nation's wealth. The baobab tree was indeed impressive, its massive trunk rising like a natural monument against the blue sky. The children led them to the northern side, where a cluster of rocks and thorny vegetation created a natural screen. Musa pointed to a specific area where the rocks did indeed look different, cleaner, less covered with lichen and weathering. Ibrahim approached carefully, his geological training evident in how he examined the rock placement. These stones had been moved recently and arranged to create a false natural appearance. It was clever work, the kind that would fool a casual observer but couldn't withstand scientific scrutiny. "Major, bring the ground-penetrating equipment," Ibrahim ordered quietly. While they waited for the specialized gear to be brought from the convoy, Ibrahim studied the surrounding terrain. The area was slightly elevated, which made sense for a tunnel entrance. It would prevent flooding during the rainy season. The vegetation patterns also told a story. Certain plants grew more vigorously here, suggesting different soil composition, possibly due to human activity below ground. When the ground-penetrating radar arrived, the readings confirmed what Ibrahim had suspected. Below the surface, there was indeed a cavity, not a natural cave, but a carefully constructed tunnel. The radar indicated it extended in two directions, one heading deeper underground toward what was likely a mining site, and another heading westward, toward the border with Côte d'Ivoire. "This is more sophisticated than I expected," Ouedraogo muttered, studying the readings. "This isn't just some artisanal miners trying to avoid taxes. This is organized, professional." Ibrahim nodded grimly, "and it's probably not the only one. If they built one tunnel this elaborate, there are likely others. We need to map the entire network before we make any moves. If we shut down one entrance, they'll simply use others and disappear." As the sun climbed higher, bringing the full heat of the day, Ibrahim made a decision that would define the investigation. "We're not going back to Ouagadougou yet," he announced. "We're going to visit every village where children have reported similar findings. I want to see the full scope of this operation before we act." The children who had led them here were thanked and asked to keep their discovery secret for now. "You've done something very important for your country," Ibrahim told them. "What you found might help many people, but for now, we need you to be patient and quiet. Can you do that?" The children nodded solemnly, understanding that they had become part of something larger than their games and adventures. As the team prepared to move to the next village, Ibrahim took one last look at the baobab tree. It stood as it had for centuries, a silent witness to the comings and goings of generations. But now it marked something new, the beginning of a trail that would lead him deep into the shadows of illegal gold trade, a journey that would test not just his resolve as a leader, but his commitment to the principles that had brought him to power. The afternoon sun beat down on the convoy as it moved toward Ticando, but Ibrahim barely noticed the heat. His mind was already in the tunnels, following the stolen gold to wherever it led, determined to bring light to these shadows that had thrived too long in darkness. Chapter 3. The Network Revealed. 3 days into the field investigation, the scale of the operation became devastatingly clear. Ibrahim stood in a makeshift command center, a repurposed school building in the town of Koudougou, staring at a map that now bristled with colored pins. Red pins marked confirmed tunnel entrances, yellow pins indicated suspected sites, and blue pins showed artisanal mining areas that appeared to be feeding into the underground network. The pattern was unmistakable. The tunnels formed a web that connected small-scale mining sites to border regions, creating a clandestine highway for stolen gold. Major Ouedraogo had brought in specialists from the National Anti-Fraud Brigade for gold, and their input had been invaluable. These were men and women who had spent years fighting gold trafficking, and even they were shocked by the sophistication of what the children's observations had helped uncover. "Mr. President, we need to see this," said Colonel Ouedraogo, the lead investigator from the Anti-Fraud Brigade. He was a compact man with intense eyes that missed nothing. He had been in the mining fraud business for 15 years and had the scars to prove it, both literal ones on his left arm from a confrontation with traffickers and metaphorical ones from years of watching his country's wealth disappear. Ouedraogo spread a series of photographs across the table. They had been taken inside one of the tunnels using small reconnaissance drones that the military had deployed. The images showed an engineering marvel, tunnels reinforced with timber and metal supports, electric lighting powered by hidden generators, and even rudimentary rail systems for moving heavy loads. This isn't amateur work, Sawadogo explained, pointing to structural details in the photos. Someone with mining engineering expertise designed this. Look at the support structures. They're calculating load-bearing capacities, accounting for seasonal ground shifts. This required significant capital investment. Ibrahim leaned closer, his geological background allowing him to appreciate the technical sophistication. How deep do they go? Some tunnels reach depths of 30 to 40 meters. They intersect with natural underground water channels in some places, which they're using for transporting materials during dry seasons. It's brilliant, in a criminal sort of way. Do we know who's behind this? Ibrahim asked, though he suspected the answer wouldn't be simple. Oh, that's where it gets complicated, Sawadogo replied, pulling out another set of documents. The tunnels connect multiple mining sites, some legal, some illegal. We're seeing involvement from artisanal miners who are being exploited, semi-industrial operations that may or may not be complicit, and definitely some organized criminal networks that facilitate the transport. A young analyst named Traoré, who specialized in financial tracking, added her perspective. Mr. President feels based on the volume of earth displaced to create these tunnels and the known productivity of the mining sites they connect, we estimate anywhere from 15 to 30 tons of gold could be moving through this network annually. The number hung in the air like an indictment. 30 tons of gold at current market prices represented hundreds of millions of dollars, money that could have built hospitals, schools, roads, and infrastructure. Instead, it was flowing out of Burkina Faso through underground channels, enriching traffickers and foreign interests while leaving villages without basic services. Ibrahim walked to the window, looking out at Koudougou's streets where life continued its daily rhythm. Market women balanced baskets on their heads, motorcycles weaved through traffic, children in school uniforms walked home in clusters. All of them were being robbed, even if they didn't know it. The stolen gold represented stolen futures. We need to understand the destination, Ibrahim said, turning back to the team. Where does the gold go once it leaves our borders? Sawadogo nodded, anticipating the question. Our intelligence suggests multiple routes. Some gold goes west into Côte d'Ivoire, where it enters the port at Abidjan. From there, it's shipped to refineries in Switzerland, UAE, and other countries. Another route goes through Togo. There's a specific case we documented where 16 kilograms were intercepted in a vehicle with gold hidden in the door panels. Togo doesn't have gold mines, Ibrahim noted. Exactly. But Switzerland imported at least 7 tons from Togo in a single year. Where do you think that gold originally came from? Burkina Faso, smuggled across borders, then laundered through countries with less scrutiny. The afternoon wore on as the team compiled their findings into a comprehensive report. The investigation had revealed not just tunnels, but an entire ecosystem of corruption and exploitation. There were the artisanal miners, often working in dangerous conditions, who were paid a fraction of what their gold was worth. There were the middlemen, sometimes legitimate trading houses, sometimes shadowy operators, who aggregated the gold and arranged its transport. There were the corrupt officials who looked the other way at checkpoints. And finally, there were the international networks that received the gold and processed it into the global market, where its criminal origins became impossible to trace. As evening approached, Ibrahim called for a break. He needed air, needed to think. He walked outside where the Harmattan winds were picking up, carrying dust from the Sahara. Major Ouedraogo joined him, respecting his commander's silence for several minutes before speaking. It's overwhelming, isn't it? Ouedraogo said quietly. The scope of it. What overwhelms me, Ibrahim replied, is thinking about how long this has been going on. These tunnels took years to build. Multiple administrations failed to notice, or chose not to notice. The children saw it because they were looking at their world with fresh eyes, without the blindness that comes from accepting things as they are. What's our next move? Ibrahim was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. We can't just shut down the tunnels. If we do that without addressing the entire network, they'll rebuild or find new routes. We need to be strategic. Strategic how? We need to follow the gold all the way to its destination. Document every step, every hand it passes through. Build a case so comprehensive that we can present it to the international community and demand accountability. At the same time, we need to provide alternatives for the artisanal miners who are trapped in this system. They're victims too, in many ways. Ouedraogo nodded thoughtfully. That's a long game. It could take months. Then we play the long game, Ibrahim said firmly. Because if we don't break this network completely, we're just putting a bandage on a hemorrhage. Our country has been bleeding wealth for too long. Go, it's time to stop the bleeding and start healing. They returned inside as darkness fell, and the team continued their work by the light of generators and battery-powered lamps. Maps were annotated, connections were drawn between entities, timelines were constructed. The children's innocent discovery had opened a door, and now Ibrahim was determined to walk through it all the way, no matter where it led or how long it took. Late that night, alone in a borrowed office, Ibrahim drafted a confidential memo to his Security Council. In it, he outlined a multi-phase operation. Phase 1 would involve continued surveillance and documentation. Phase 2 would focus on identifying and securing the cooperation of honest actors in the mining sector. Phase 3 would involve simultaneous operations across multiple sites designed to shut down the network before it could adapt. And Phase 4 would be perhaps the most important, the creation of legitimate, transparent systems that would make such networks impossible to sustain in the future. As he finished writing, Ibrahim thought again about the children from the village, Musa, Fatima, and Boubacar. They had no idea that their observations would trigger an investigation of this magnitude, but in a way, they embodied exactly what Burkina Faso needed. People who noticed when something was wrong and had the courage to say something about it, even if they didn't fully understand the implications. Tomorrow, the investigation would continue. There were more villages to visit, more tunnels to map, more pieces of the puzzle to fit together. But tonight, Ibrahim allowed himself a moment of quiet determination. The path forward was clear now, even if it was difficult. The children had shown him the way. Now it was his responsibility to follow it to the end. Chapter 4. Into the Depths. The decision to actually enter one of the tunnels was not made lightly. For 3 days, Ibrahim's security team had debated the risks, while engineers assessed structural integrity and intelligence officers warned of potential threats. But Ibrahim was insistent. "I need to see it with my own eyes," he told them. "I need to understand exactly how this works." They chose a tunnel entrance near the village of Traoré, selected because surveillance had confirmed it was currently inactive. No recent foot traffic, no signs of immediate use. The entrance was similar to the first one they had found, hidden beneath a cluster of rocks and thorny vegetation, camouflaged to blend with the natural landscape. The team that descended consisted of 6 people: Ibrahim, Major Ouedraogo, 2 security officers trained in confined space operations, an engineer from the Ministry of Mines named Kone, and a geologist named Dr. Zongo, who had worked on several of Burkina Faso's industrial mining projects. Each wore protective gear, carried lights, and was connected by radio to a surface team that would monitor their progress. "And remember," Kone cautioned as they prepared to enter, "underground environments are unpredictable. If I say we need to leave, we leave immediately. No discussion." Ibrahim nodded his agreement. Leadership sometimes meant deferring to expertise, and in this environment, Kone's judgment was law. The entrance was narrow, requiring them to crawl for the first 10 meters. The earth was cool against Ibrahim's hands, and he could smell the distinctive mineral scent that marked areas of gold concentration, something his geological training had taught him to recognize. Then, suddenly, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, high enough to stand in. Dr. Zongo swept his light across the walls, his professional interest evident despite the criminal nature of what they were exploring. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the wall construction. "They've reinforced the walls with a mixture of cement and local materials. And see these marks. This was excavated using both traditional methods and modern equipment." The tunnel continued forward, sloping gradually downward. Every 20 meters or so, they encountered support structures, wooden beams and metal brackets that held back the earth. Electric cables ran along one wall, though currently unpowered, suggesting the tunnel normally had lighting. "This is where artisanal mining intersects with something more organized," Kone observed. "The artisanal miners dig the initial shafts to reach the gold-bearing rock. Then someone else comes in and expands it into a transport tunnel. They walk deeper, their lights creating dancing shadows on the walls." The tunnel branched several times, creating a network more complex than they had anticipated from surface surveys. At each junction, Dr. Zongo marked their path with chalk, ensuring they could find their way back. After perhaps 30 minutes of careful progress, they reached a larger chamber that appeared to be a staging area. Here they found evidence of recent activity: empty sacks that had once held ore, water bottles, the remains of food, and most tellingly, containers that had held mercury and cyanide, the chemicals used in gold extraction. "This is where they process the gold before transport," Dr. Zongo explained, his light illuminating work surfaces carved into the rock walls. "They bring the ore here, crush it, amalgamate it with mercury, then burn off the mercury to collect the gold. It's an incredibly dangerous process, especially in an enclosed space like this." Ibrahim examined the area carefully, his mind cataloguing every detail. He noticed scratches on the floor where heavy loads had been dragged, hooks embedded in the ceiling for hanging lamps or equipment, and most ominously, dark stains on the rock that could have been blood. People had worked here, possibly injured or killed by the hazardous conditions or dangerous substances. "How many people do you estimate work in a tunnel like this?" Ibrahim asked. "Based on the space and the evidence of activity, probably 5 to 10 people on a regular basis," Kone answered, "plus others who bring ore from the mining sites and those who transport the processed gold out. It's a whole underground economy." They continued through the chamber and into another tunnel that led further into the earth. This section was cruder, less finished, and Major Ouedraogo insisted they proceed with extreme caution. The tunnel began to show signs of water seepage, and in some places, they had to wade through ankle-deep puddles that gleamed strangely in their lamplight, possibly contaminated with mercury or other mining chemicals. After another 20 minutes, they reached what appeared to be the end of this particular branch, a working face where miners had been extracting gold-bearing ore. The walls here glittered with mineralization, and Ibrahim, despite the criminal context, couldn't help but appreciate the geological reality of what he was seeing. This was rich ore, quality that should have been feeding legitimate operations, generating revenue for national development. "I've seen enough," Ibrahim finally said. "Let's head back." The return journey was quieter, each person absorbed in their own thoughts about what they had witnessed. When they finally emerged back into daylight, the sun was lower in the sky, and Ibrahim felt as though he had been underground for days rather than hours. Back at the surface command post, they debriefed with the larger team. Ibrahim's experience in the tunnel had given him insights that no amount of reports could have provided. He understood now how the artisanal miners were both victims and participants in this system. They needed to survive, and the tunnels offered opportunities that the formal economy didn't provide. Any solution would have to address not just the criminal network, but the economic desperation that made people vulnerable to exploitation. "And we need drone mapping of the entire tunnel system," Ibrahim ordered. "I want to know every branch, every chamber, every exit point, and we need to start identifying who's working these tunnels. Some of them are just trying to feed their families. Those people need help, not punishment. But the ones organizing this network, the ones profiting from it, they're the target." Colonel Sawadago from the Anti-Fraud Brigade had been coordinating intelligence while Ibrahim was underground. He now presented findings that connected some dots. "Mr. President, we've been tracking financial flows associated with suspicious gold trading houses. 3 companies in particular keep appearing in our analysis. They're all registered in Burkina Faso, but the beneficial owners are foreign nationals, 2 from West African countries, 1 from Asia. Can we prove they're connected to these tunnels?" Ibrahim asked. "Not yet directly, but we're building the case. We've found that these trading houses buy gold at prices well below market value from sources that can't be traced. Then they export it through legal channels, mixed with legitimately mined gold. It's a perfect laundering operation." As darkness fell again, Ibrahim authorized the next phase of the investigation. Undercover agents would be embedded in communities around the mining areas, gathering intelligence on who operated the tunnels, who transported the gold, and who provided the resources that kept the network functioning. It would be dangerous work. These were criminals who had invested heavily in their operation and wouldn't surrender it easily. Chapter 5. Following the money. The financial investigation proved to be as complex as the physical tunnel network. Analyst Traoré and her team had been working 16-hour days, tracing money flows through a maze of trading companies, shell corporations, and informal transfer systems that were designed to be opaque. The genius of this operation, Traoré explained to Ibrahim during a late-night briefing, is that it operates in the gaps between formal and informal economies. The artisanal miners are paid in cash, no records. The gold moves through traders who keep minimal documentation. By the time it reaches a legitimate export company, it's been cleaned through several hands. She pulled up a flowchart on her laptop, showing the journey of stolen gold. Here's what we've reconstructed. Gold extracted through the tunnel networks is sold to local buyers. These are often legitimate trading posts with government licenses. They mix this illegal gold with legally mined gold, making it impossible to distinguish the origins. Then it goes to larger trading houses in Ouagadougou or Bobo-Dioulasso, who export it. But the export documentation would show quantities that should match our mining production data, Ibrahim noted. Exactly, and that's where we see the fraud. The production numbers from industrial mines are inflated in reports, while the tunnels produce ghost gold that doesn't appear in official statistics. The traffickers are essentially stealing from two sides. They're taking gold that should be going through legitimate channels, and they're manipulating the data so the theft isn't obvious. Ibrahim studied the flowchart, his mind working through the implications. Who benefits most from this arrangement? The international buyers. Ultimately, they're getting Burkina Faso's gold at prices that don't reflect its true value or the costs of legitimate extraction. The local criminals make profit, yes, but the real wealth leaves the country entirely. Over the next week, the investigation expanded to include international cooperation. Ibrahim personally reached out to counterparts in neighboring countries, requesting assistance in tracking gold flows across borders. The response was mixed. Some governments were cooperative, others less so, either due to capacity limitations or, Ibrahim suspected, because they benefited from looking the other way. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A junior customs officer in the eastern region, a young woman named Ouagadougou who had been following the investigation with interest, brought forward records she had been keeping on her own initiative. I always felt something was wrong, she explained to Major Ouagadougou when she contacted his team. The volume of trucks claiming to carry agricultural goods going to Togo seemed excessive, so I started recording license plates and comparing them to official manifests. Her records revealed a pattern. Certain trucks made regular trips to the border, always claiming to carry legitimate goods, but the vehicles sat much lower on their suspensions than they should for the declared cargo weights. Someone was moving heavy materials disguised as lighter goods. This is excellent work, Ibrahim told her when she was brought to brief him personally. Why didn't you report this through official channels before? Ouagadougou looked uncomfortable. Mr. President, some of my superiors at the customs post, I believe they were aware of what was happening. I didn't know who to trust. This revelation led to an internal investigation that uncovered a network of corruption within border control agencies. Several customs officials were accepting bribes to wave through suspicious shipments. Police officers at checkpoints were similarly compromised. The tunnel network could only function because of these corrupted links in the security chain. Ibrahim faced a difficult decision. Arresting these officials might alert the trafficking network that they were under investigation, but leaving them in place meant continuing to allow stolen gold to leave the country. After consulting with his security council, he chose a middle path. The corrupt officials would be quietly transferred to positions where they couldn't interfere, replaced by carefully vetted personnel loyal to the investigation. We're not just fighting criminals, Ibrahim remarked to Ouagadougou during one of their evening strategy sessions. We're fighting a culture of tolerance for corruption that has developed over decades. Breaking the tunnel network is important, but if we don't change the culture, new networks will just emerge. As the investigation deepened, they began to identify specific individuals who played key roles in the trafficking operation. There was Ousmane, a trader in Ouagadougou who operated what appeared to be a legitimate gold-buying business, but was actually a critical node in laundering stolen gold. There was Kwame, a truck driver who made regular runs to Togo, his vehicle's hidden compartments carrying far more valuable cargo than his manifests declared. There was Monsieur Chen, a foreign investor who owned interests in several trading companies and whose financial connections extended to refineries in Asia and the Middle East. We need to be patient, Colonel Ouagadougou advised. If we move too soon, we'll catch the small fish, but the big ones will disappear. We need to identify the top of this network, the people who have the capital and connections to make this whole operation possible. Chapter 6. The Weight of Evidence. 2 months into the investigation, the command center in Kudugu had evolved into a sophisticated intelligence operation. One entire wall was covered with a network diagram showing hundreds of connections between miners, traders, transporters, corrupt officials, and international buyers. Photos, documents, financial records, and surveillance images created a picture of systematic theft that had been operating for years. Ibrahim stood before this wall often, studying it like a general studying a battlefield. Each pin represented a person, each line a relationship or transaction. The complexity was staggering, but patterns were emerging. The network had approximately 20 key figures, people whose removal would collapse significant portions of the operation. Several dozen more played supporting roles. And then there were the thousands of artisanal miners, the drivers, the casual laborers, people caught in the system more than actively criminal. "Mr. President, we have something," Dr. Zongo said, entering with excitement barely contained in his voice. He had been coordinating the drone mapping of the tunnel network, and the results had just been compiled into a comprehensive 3D model. He pulled up the model on a large screen, and Ibrahim watched as the underground network materialized in digital form. It was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Dozens of tunnels, hundreds of chambers, all interconnected in a web that stretched across 3 provinces. Some tunnels ran for kilometers, connecting mining areas that appeared unrelated on the surface. This represents approximately 80 kilometers of underground passages, Dr. Zongo explained. Some are natural caves that have been expanded, others are entirely artificial. The sophistication varies. Some sections are barely safe, while others show engineering skills that suggest professional involvement. Ibrahim studied the model, rotating it to see different perspectives. How long would it take to build something like this? Years. At least 5 to 7 years, possibly longer. This wasn't done by a few opportunistic criminals. This required planning, capital investment, sustained effort, and the ability to operate without detection for an extended period. The implications were sobering. Multiple governments, multiple administrations, either missed this entirely or chose not to see it. The failure represented systemic problems with governance, oversight, and accountability. If you're enjoying this story, consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue bringing you more content like this. That afternoon, Ibrahim convened a meeting with his core investigation team. It was time to decide on the next phase. Colonel Sawadogo presented the prosecution case they were building. "We have evidence that would support criminal charges against 47 individuals and 11 companies. The charges would range from fraud and theft to corruption and, in some cases, money laundering. If we proceed to arrests now, we could significantly disrupt the network." "But not destroy it," Ibrahim said. It wasn't a question. "No, sir. The international connections would remain intact. New local operators would emerge. Within a year, possibly less, a similar network could be functioning." "Then we're not ready to act," Ibrahim decided. "We need to follow the gold all the way to its final destinations. I want to know which refineries are receiving Burkina Faso's stolen gold. I want to know which companies are profiting from it. And I want that evidence to be so overwhelming that the international community can't ignore it." This decision meant extending the investigation, which carried risks. The longer they waited, the more gold would be stolen. But Ibrahim believed that comprehensive action would be more effective than partial measures. Over the following weeks, they worked with international partners to track gold shipments beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Interpol provided assistance, as did sympathetic governments in Europe and Asia. The trail led to refineries in Switzerland, the UAE, and several Asian countries. Some of these refineries were knowingly receiving stolen gold. Others may have been victims of fraud themselves, believing they were buying legitimately mined resources. One particularly damning piece of evidence came from comparing import records in Switzerland with export records from Togo. Switzerland had imported 7 tons of gold from Togo in a single year, an impossibility since Togo had no active gold mines. When confronted with this data, the Swiss government acknowledged the discrepancy and agreed to investigate the refineries involved. Similar patterns emerged with the UAE. Dubai had become a major gold trading hub, and some of that gold was certainly coming from Burkina Faso through illegal channels. The investigation team compiled evidence of systematic smuggling that deprived Burkina Faso of billions in revenue annually. This is bigger than just stopping a criminal network, Ibrahim told his cabinet during a confidential briefing. This is about asserting our sovereignty over our own resources. For too long, international markets have benefited from African gold without asking hard questions about where it comes from or whether it was acquired legally. That has to change. As the evidence mounted, Ibrahim began planning for the final phase of the operation. It would require coordination across multiple agencies and countries, perfect timing, and most importantly, alternatives for the artisanal miners whose livelihoods depended on the tunnel network. Without providing them with legitimate opportunities, shutting down the tunnels would just push people deeper into poverty or toward other illegal activities. The Ministry of Mines developed a plan for formalizing artisanal mining operations, providing technical support, fair pricing, and legal channels for gold sales. The goal was to create a system where artisanal miners could earn a living without being exploited by criminal networks or forced to work in dangerous chain illegal conditions. Late one evening, as Ibrahim reviewed the final elements of the operational plan, he thought again about the children who had started this all, Musa, Fatima, and Boubacar. Their innocent curiosity had led to one of the most comprehensive investigations into resource theft in Burkina Faso's history. Their ability to notice what adults had overlooked reminded him of an important truth. Sometimes the clearest vision comes from those who haven't yet learned to accept injustice as normal. Tomorrow, he would approve the final operational plan. Within a week, Operation Sovereign Gold would begin. Simultaneous actions across the country to shut down the tunnel network, arrest the key figures, and reclaim control over Burkina Faso's mineral wealth. The evidence was ready. The teams were prepared. All that remained was to act. Chapter 7. Operation Sovereign Gold. The operation began at dawn across 17 locations simultaneously. Ibrahim had insisted on military precision. Every tunnel entrance, every major trafficker's location, every corrupt official's office would be hit at exactly the same moment, giving the network no time to warn each other or destroy evidence. Ibrahim himself was at a command center outside Ouagadougou, monitoring multiple video feeds as teams moved into position. Major Ouedraogo commanded the field operations, coordinating between army units, police forces, and anti-fraud brigade agents. Every person involved in the operation had been vetted carefully to ensure no information leaked to the trafficking network. At exactly 6 in the morning, Ouedraogo's voice came through the radio. All units, commence operations. The first target was the tunnel entrance near Mognonré, the one Ibrahim had explored months earlier. A military engineering unit moved in with equipment to safely seal the entrance while another team swept the underground network, documenting evidence and ensuring no one was trapped inside. Similar operations unfolded at 16 other locations across the western provinces. In Ouagadougou, police raided the offices of 3 trading companies that had been central to laundering stolen gold. Computers were seized, files were secured, and company executives were arrested. The element of surprise was complete. By the time these companies realized what was happening, all exits were blocked and evidence was already being collected. At border checkpoints, carefully selected customs teams began systematic inspections of trucks that matched the profiles the investigation had identified. Within the first 3 hours, they had intercepted 5 vehicles carrying hidden gold, nearly 200 kilograms in total, worth millions of dollars. But the operation wasn't without challenges. At one tunnel site near Tikando, the security team encountered resistance. Several armed men, apparently guards for the trafficking network, opened fire when police approached. In the firefight that followed, 2 traffickers were wounded and arrested, and 1 police officer suffered a minor injury. No lives were lost, but the incident reminded everyone that this was a dangerous operation, not just an administrative exercise. In Bobo Dioulasso, the arrest of Ousmane, the trader who had been a key node in the laundering operation, provided a dramatic moment. When police entered his compound, they found a sophisticated counting and weighing facility for gold, along with records that documented transactions worth hundreds of millions of CFA francs. Ousmane himself attempted to flee through a back entrance, but was apprehended trying to climb over his compound wall. "Do you understand what you're being arrested for?" the lead investigator asked him. "I was just running a business," Ousmane protested. "Everyone in this trade does the same thing." "That's exactly the problem we're solving," the investigator replied. By midday, the initial phase of Operation Sovereign Gold had achieved most of its objectives. 41 individuals were in custody, 11 companies were shut down and under investigation, and 17 tunnel entrances were secured. The amount of gold seized was smaller than hoped. The traffickers had been smart enough not to keep large stockpiles, but the disruption to the network was significant. However, the most important arrests were still pending. The investigation had identified 3 individuals as the top tier of the operation, the people with international connections who could move large quantities of gold across borders and arrange its sale to refineries abroad. These were careful men who insulated themselves behind layers of intermediaries. One was Monsieur Chen, the foreign investor with interests in multiple trading companies. Intelligence indicated he was currently in Ouagadougou, staying at a luxury hotel in the city center. A specialized team, led by Colonel Sawadogo, moved to arrest him early in the afternoon. The operation was delicate. Chen had diplomatic connections through his country's embassy, and any misstep could create international complications, but the evidence against him was solid. When confronted in his hotel room, Chen's initial response was outrage. "This is harassment. I'm a legitimate businessman. I'll have my embassy involved." "You're welcome to contact your embassy," Colonel Sawadogo said calmly. "But you're still under arrest for receiving stolen property, money laundering, and fraud. We have documentation of your company's purchasing gold that was extracted through illegal tunnels and transported in violation of customs laws." Chen's confidence wavered when Sawadogo showed him copies of financial records that traced transactions from his companies back to the tunnel network. The paper trail was irrefutable. The other 2 top-tier traffickers proved more elusive. One, a West African national named Diallo, had apparently received warning and fled the country before the operation began, suggesting that despite their careful vetting, there had been a leak somewhere in the security apparatus. The third, known only as the coordinator in intercepted communications, remained unidentified. The investigation team suspected this person operated from outside Burkina Faso, coordinating the network remotely. By evening, as the sun set on a day that had begun with such dramatic action, Ibrahim convened his senior team for an assessment. The mood was cautiously optimistic, but not celebratory. They had struck a significant blow against the trafficking network, but the operation was far from complete. "We've cut off the tentacles," Ibrahim told his team, "but we need to find the head. The coordinator, whoever that is the key. If we don't identify and stop that person, the network can rebuild." "We have everyone we arrested in custody," Colonel Sawadogo reported. "We'll be conducting interrogations throughout the night. Someone will talk." And someone did. Ousmane, the trader from Bobo Dioulasso, faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of decades in prison, agreed to cooperate. In a lengthy interview that lasted past midnight, he provided details about how the network operated, who the key figures were, and most importantly, how they communicated with the coordinator. He never used his real name, Ousmane explained, his earlier arrogance gone, replaced by the exhaustion of someone whose world had collapsed. "We communicated through encrypted messaging apps. He would send instructions about where gold should be delivered, what prices to pay, when shipments should cross borders. He seemed to know everything about the operation, but none of us ever met him in person." "How did you receive payment?" an investigator asked. "Through mobile money transfers, sometimes through banks in other countries. The amounts were always structured to stay below reporting thresholds. It was sophisticated." "Did you ever have any hints about who he might be?" Ousmane hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Once, during a phone call, he usually only messaged, but this time there was a phone call. I heard an airplane in the background, and he said something about having to rush to catch a flight. I got the impression he traveled frequently, maybe worked at an airport or in aviation, but that's all I know. It wasn't much, but it was a start." The investigation team began cross-referencing travel records, looking for patterns that might identify the coordinator. It would take time, but they had momentum now. That night, Ibrahim addressed the nation on television, explaining Operation Sovereign Gold to the public. He spoke about the children who had first noticed something wrong, about the investigation that followed, and about the vast network of theft that had been stealing from every citizen of Burkina Faso. "This gold belonged to you," he told his viewers. "It should have built schools, hospitals, roads. Instead, it enriched criminals and foreign interests. Today, we took the first major step in reclaiming what is ours. But this is just the beginning. We're not only going to stop this theft, we're going to build systems that make it impossible in the future." The response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from across the country, from ordinary citizens expressing support, from artisanal miners asking about the promised reforms, from diaspora Burkinabe sharing pride in their country's actions. There was also criticism from some international business interests who complained about disruption to trade. But Ibrahim expected that those who benefited from the old, corrupt system would resist change. As the first day of Operation Sovereign Gold ended, Ibrahim stood on a balcony overlooking Ouagadougou. The city's lights sparkled beneath the night sky, and somewhere in those streets, the stolen gold had once flowed through illegal channels. Not anymore. Not if he had anything to say about it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, consolidating the gains, beginning prosecutions, implementing the reforms that would prevent this from happening again. But tonight, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had followed the trail that children's footsteps had first revealed, and it had led them to strike a blow for justice and national sovereignty. The fight was far from over, but at least now they were fighting. Chapter 8. Unraveling the Web. In the days following the initial raids, the investigation entered a new phase, one of painstaking analysis of seized evidence. Computers confiscated from the trading companies contained thousands of files, encrypted communications, and financial records that needed to be decrypted and analyzed. Physical evidence from the tunnels included notebooks with handwritten records, mobile phones with revealing text messages, and various documents that mapped out the operations. Analyst Traoré and her expanded team worked in a secure facility in Ouagadougou, piecing together the financial architecture of the trafficking network. What emerged was a picture of extraordinary complexity and reach. The network had connections not just across West Africa, but extending to Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. "This isn't just about gold anymore," Traoré told Ibrahim during a briefing. "The infrastructure they built, the tunnels, the corrupt networks, the international connections was being used for other illicit goods too. We found evidence of mercury smuggling, explosives trafficking, and even documents suggesting involvement in wildlife crime." Ibrahim wasn't surprised. Criminal networks rarely specialized in just one activity. The tunnels that moved gold could move anything of value, and the corrupt border systems that waved through illegal gold could facilitate other smuggling as well. The interrogations of arrested suspects provided additional insights. Most of the lower-level participants were artisanal miners or small traders who had been exploited more than they were truly criminal. They faced financial desperation and had taken opportunities that the tunnel network provided, often without understanding the full scope of what they were involved in. "These people need rehabilitation, not harsh punishment," Ibrahim told his justice minister. "We need to distinguish between those who were coerced or economically trapped and those who built and ran the network." The minister agreed, and they began developing a system of differentiated prosecution. Those at the bottom of the network, the artisanal miners and small operators, would be offered opportunities to enter legitimate mining programs with minor penalties or community service. Those in the middle, the traders and transporters who knowingly participated, would face significant fines and moderate prison terms, and those at the top, the organizers, the corrupt officials, the international facilitators, would be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Meanwhile, the hunt for the coordinator continued. The clue about aviation connections had led investigators to examine passenger manifests for frequent travelers between Burkina Faso and countries known to be destinations for smuggled gold. The list of potential suspects was long, but cross-referencing travel patterns with the timing of known smuggling operations helped narrow it down. A breakthrough came from an unlikely source. One of the mobile phones seized from a trader contained a contact labeled simply as TC, likely the coordinator. Forensic analysis of the phone's data revealed that this contact had been in Burkina Faso at least 6 times in the past year, always staying for just 2 or 3 days. Phone tower data showed that during these visits, the person had traveled to some of the mining areas where tunnels were located. Thought this person was doing site inspections. Major Ouedraogo realized the coordinator wasn't just remote management, he was actually coming to Burkina Faso to oversee operations. With this information, they focused on airport records, looking for someone who fit the pattern: frequent short visits, travel to mining regions, connections to gold trading countries. The search identified 3 potential candidates. One was ruled out quickly. He turned out to be a mining equipment salesman with legitimate business. The second was more promising: a man named Amadou who lived in Dubai but had extensive business interests in West Africa. The third candidate was the most intriguing: a man named Issa Konaté, who held citizenship in both Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire, who worked as a logistics consultant and whose travel patterns perfectly matched the timeline of smuggling operations. Further investigation revealed that Konaté had once worked for a legitimate mining company, but had been terminated for irregularities in his expense reports. He had the knowledge, the connections, and apparently the motivation. "I think we found him," Colonel Ouedraogo said, laying out the evidence for Ibrahim. Konaté has been in and out of Burkina Faso 40 times in the past 3 years. He has bank accounts in 4 countries, and his known associates include several people we've already arrested. Where is he now? According to immigration records, he entered Burkina Faso 2 days before we launched Operation Sovereign Gold, then left the day before the raids. He went to Abidjan. We believe he got wind that something was happening and fled. Ibrahim considered the situation. Konaté was outside their immediate jurisdiction, but Côte d'Ivoire had been cooperative during the investigation. Send a formal request to the Ivorian authorities for his arrest and extradition. Include all our evidence. Make it clear this is a priority. While the legal process moved forward, the team continued analyzing the broader international network. They identified 3 major refineries that had been receiving gold stolen from Burkina Faso: one in Switzerland, one in the UAE, and one in Singapore. Not all of the gold going to these refineries was stolen. They also received legitimate gold, but the investigation had traced specific shipments that originated from the tunnel network. Ibrahim personally contacted his counterparts, the leaders of Switzerland, the UAE, and Singapore, to share evidence and request cooperation. The responses varied. Switzerland, facing international pressure over its role in precious metal trading, agreed to a joint investigation. The UAE was more circumspect but indicated willingness to review their gold import procedures. Singapore requested additional evidence but didn't commit to action. "We can't force other countries to act," Ibrahim told his foreign minister, "but we can make the evidence so public and so damning that they face pressure from their own citizens and the international community. Sometimes shame is more powerful than legal obligation." The decision was made to release a comprehensive report on the investigation, documenting the full scope of the gold smuggling network, the tunnels, the international connections, and the complicity of certain refineries in receiving stolen goods. The report would be presented to the African Union, the United Nations, and released to the international media. Dr. Zongo and his team prepared technical documentation of the tunnels, including the 3D models and engineering analyses that showed the sophistication of the operation. Analyst Traoré compiled the financial flows, creating charts and graphics that made the massive scale of the theft clear. Colonel Ouedraogo wrote sections detailing the criminal network's structure and operations. And Ibrahim himself wrote the introduction, framing the issue in terms of sovereignty, justice, and the right of African nations to control their own resources. For too long, Africa's wealth has been extracted and exported with insufficient questions asked about whether this extraction is legal, fair, or beneficial to African people, Ibrahim wrote. This report documents one instance of systematic theft, but it represents a broader pattern that must end. Africa's resources should serve Africa's development. The report was titled, "Following the Gold: How International Networks Exploit Burkina Faso's Mineral Wealth." It was released simultaneously in French, English, and Arabic, ensuring wide distribution across Africa and internationally. The response was immediate and intense. International media picked up the story, with major newspapers running detailed articles about the tunnel network and the stolen gold. Human rights organizations praised Burkina Faso's transparency and called for investigations in other countries. Some mining industry groups expressed concern, while others acknowledged that improved regulation was necessary. But there was also backlash. Some international business interests accused Ibrahim of exaggerating the problem to justify resource nationalism. Several media outlets questioned whether he was using the investigation for political purposes, and predictably, there were those who suggested that corruption within Burkina Faso itself was the real problem, not international networks. Ibrahim addressed these criticisms head-on in a series of interviews with international press. "Of course we have corruption problems," he acknowledged in one interview. "That's why we arrested corrupt officials as part of this operation. But the international buyers who receive stolen gold are equally culpable. You cannot claim ignorance when 7 tons of gold arrives from a country with no gold mines. That's not a mistake. That's willful blindness for profit." Chapter 9. Building the Alternative. While the criminal prosecutions and international negotiations continued, Ibrahim focused on what he considered the most important element of Operation Sovereign Gold, creating legitimate alternatives for artisanal miners. Shutting down illegal operations was necessary but insufficient. Without providing legal pathways for miners to earn their livelihood, the tunnels would eventually reopen, or new illegal networks would emerge. The Ministry of Mines, working with geological experts and international development partners, designed a program called Gold for Development. The concept was straightforward. Artisanal miners would be organized into cooperatives, provided with technical training and safety equipment, given fair prices for their gold, and integrated into the legal economy. In exchange, they would work only in designated areas, follow environmental and safety regulations, and pay taxes that would fund local development. Ibrahim traveled to several mining communities to explain the program directly. In the village of Tikando, where some of the tunnels had been discovered, he met with a group of artisanal miners who were skeptical about the government's promises. "We've heard these things before," said an older miner named Boubacar. "Officials come, make promises, then disappear. Meanwhile, we need to feed our families today, not when some program eventually starts working." "I understand your skepticism," Ibrahim replied, sitting on the ground with the miners rather than standing over them. "But let me ask you this. How much are you actually paid for the gold you extract?" The miners discussed among themselves. Then Boubacar answered, "Maybe 20,000 CFA francs per gram." "And do you know what the international market price is?" Ibrahim asked. When they shook their heads, he told them, "Currently, gold trades at about 35,000 CFA francs per gram. Someone is taking 15,000 francs for every gram you produce, 40% of the value of your work. Under our program, you'll receive the full market price, minus only a small tax and cooperative fees." The numbers got their attention. Ibrahim continued, "Plus, we'll provide safety equipment so you're not breathing toxic chemicals. We'll give you access to more efficient tools so you can extract more gold with less labor. And the taxes you pay will fund projects in your own communities. Schools, clinics, roads. You'll actually see where your tax money goes." "What about the people who ran the tunnels?" another miner asked. "Won't they just threaten us if we join this program?" "Most of them are in jail," Ibrahim said bluntly, "and those who aren't will be soon. The tunnel network is finished. The question now is what comes next. You can wait for another criminal network to exploit you, or you can be part of building something legal and sustainable." Similar conversations happened in village after village. The response was cautiously hopeful. Miners wanted to believe in the program, but had been disappointed by government initiatives before. Ibrahim knew that actions would matter more than words. The program had to deliver results quickly and visibly. Within 2 months of Operation Sovereign Gold, the first artisanal mining cooperatives were operational. Each cooperative received support from a government geologist who helped identify the most productive areas to work. They received modern equipment, metal detectors, proper digging tools, safety gear for handling chemicals, and most importantly, they had a direct relationship with the state-owned gold purchasing company that paid fair prices. The results were encouraging. Miners who joined the cooperatives reported higher incomes than they had earned under the illegal system. The government began collecting tax revenue that was immediately reinvested in mining communities. A new health clinic in Mognonray, solar-powered water pumps in 3 villages, improved roads connecting mining areas to markets. But the program also faced challenges. Some miners resisted formalization, preferring the informality of the old system despite its exploitation. Environmental concerns emerged. Even with better equipment, artisanal mining could cause significant ecological damage if not properly managed. And there were reports of some cooperative leaders trying to recreate exploitative systems within the new legal framework. Ibrahim personally intervened in one case where a cooperative president was discovered taking kickbacks from miners. The man was removed, prosecuted, and replaced through democratic election by the cooperative members. "We're building a new system," Ibrahim told the cooperative. "If we tolerate corruption in the new system, we're no better than the old one." While the artisanal mining program developed, the government also reformed industrial mining regulations. New contracts with large mining companies included stricter oversight provisions, requirements to purchase supplies from Burkinabe businesses where possible, and mandates to train and employ local workers. The state-owned mining company, SOPAM-IB, expanded its role, taking direct ownership of some mines and earning revenue that went straight to the national budget. The international response to these reforms was mixed. Some mining companies welcomed the clearer regulations and more stable operating environment. Others complained about increased costs and government interference. Several threatened to reduce their investments in Burkina Faso. "Let them complain," Ibrahim told his mines minister. "For decades, foreign companies extracted our gold with minimal benefit to our people. That era is over. Companies that want to operate here will do so under terms that actually benefit Burkina Faso, or they can go elsewhere." It was a bold stance, and it carried risks. If major mining companies did pull out, it could hurt employment and government revenue in the short term. But Ibrahim was gambling that standing firm would eventually attract companies willing to operate under fair terms, while also demonstrating to other African nations that it was possible to assert sovereignty over natural resources. One evening, Ibrahim received a visit from an unexpected source. The three children who had first discovered the tunnels, Musa, Fatima, and Boubacar, came to the presidential office with their parents and village chief. They had been brought to Ouagadougou specifically to meet with Ibrahim and see how their discovery had led to national reforms. "Mr. President," young Musa said shyly, "our teacher said we helped the country. Is that true?" Ibrahim knelt down to eye level with the children. "So it's absolutely true. You noticed something wrong and you told adults about it. That's exactly what good citizens do. Because of your sharp eyes and your willingness to speak up, we were able to stop people from stealing gold that belonged to all of us." "Will our village get a new school?" Fatima asked hopefully. "Your village already has a new school under construction," Ibrahim told her, smiling. "It's being built with money that we recovered from the gold smugglers. The school will have your names on a plaque, so everyone knows that 3 brave children helped make it possible." The children's eyes widened with excitement and pride. Their parents looked on with a mixture of emotions, pride in their children, gratitude for the recognition, and hope for a better future. After the children left, Ibrahim sat alone in his office, thinking about the long road still ahead. Operation Sovereign Gold had been successful in many ways. It had shut down the tunnel network, arrested major traffickers, reformed mining practices, and begun to recover stolen wealth. But it had also revealed how deeply corruption had penetrated institutions, how many people had become dependent on illegal economies, and how difficult it was to change systems that had operated unchallenged for years. The real test would come in sustaining these reforms. Criminal networks were resilient. They adapted, found new routes, corrupted new officials. Keeping them suppressed would require constant vigilance. And building legitimate alternatives required sustained investment and political will over years, not just months. But as Ibrahim looked at the photographs the children's parents had insisted on taking, images of Musa, Fatima, and Boubacar standing proudly next to the president, he felt renewed determination. If children could believe in a better future, if they could notice injustice and speak up about it, then adults had no excuse for accepting corruption as normal. The work would continue, as long as necessary, until Burkina Faso's gold truly served its people's development. Chapter 10. International Reckoning. The report following the gold created waves far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. International media coverage forced conversations that had long been avoided about the complicity of wealthy nations in resource extraction from Africa. The European Parliament held hearings on gold smuggling, where Ibrahim was invited to testify via video link. Standing before the virtual assembly of European lawmakers, Ibrahim spoke with the directness that had become his trademark. Every year, European refineries process thousands of tons of gold from Africa. Some of this is legitimately mined and fairly traded, but significant amounts are stolen, taken from countries like mine through smuggling networks that deprive our people of development resources. When a country with no gold mines somehow exports 7 tons of gold to Switzerland, questions should be asked. When those questions aren't asked, it's not ignorance, it's complicity. Some European parliamentarians defended their country's systems, pointing to existing regulations, but others, particularly representatives from civil society organizations, supported Ibrahim's position and called for stricter due diligence requirements for gold importers. The Swiss government, facing particular scrutiny given their role as a global gold trading hub, announced new measures. All gold importers would be required to document the full chain of custody from mine to refinery. Suspicious imports from countries known for smuggling would face enhanced inspections, and Switzerland would work with African nations to combat illegal gold flows. This is progress, Ibrahim told his foreign minister. But we need to see if they actually implement these measures or if they're just making announcements to reduce pressure. The UAE's response was more complicated. Dubai's role as a gold trading center was crucial to their economy, and authorities there were less willing to impose strict regulations that might drive business elsewhere. However, after sustained diplomatic pressure and media attention, they agreed to a bilateral agreement with Burkina Faso that included information sharing and cooperative investigations of suspicious gold flows. Singapore remained resistant to changes, arguing that as a trading hub, they couldn't be responsible for verifying the origins of every commodity passing through their markets. Ibrahim was frustrated, but unsurprised. Changing global systems takes time, he acknowledged. But we've started the conversation. That's the first step. Meanwhile, progress was being made on the arrest of Issa Konaté, the suspected coordinator. The Ivorian authorities had located him in Abidjan and, after reviewing Burkina Faso's evidence, agreed to extradition. However, Konaté had hired expensive lawyers who filed multiple appeals, delaying the process. It was becoming a test of political will. Would Côte d'Ivoire follow through on extradition despite legal obstacles, or would Konaté's lawyers successfully stall until the case lost momentum? Ibrahim personally called his Ivorian counterpart to emphasize the importance of the case. This man coordinated a network that stole hundreds of millions of dollars from my country, he explained. But it wasn't just Burkina Faso he hurt. These criminal networks undermine governance across West Africa. If we let him escape justice, we're telling criminals that they can operate with impunity as long as they're clever enough to cross borders. The Ivorian president assured Ibrahim of his commitment to the extradition, and indeed the Ivorian government's lawyers fought the legal appeals. After 2 months of legal wrangling, Konaté's final appeal was rejected, and he was placed on a plane to Ouagadougou, accompanied by security officials. His arrival was kept quiet to avoid media spectacle, but internally, the investigation team viewed it as a crucial milestone. Colonel Sawadogo conducted the first interrogation personally, laying out the evidence against Konaté in methodical detail. "We have your travel records," Sawadogo said. "We have communications from phones used by your subordinates that reference you. We have financial transfers that flow through accounts you control. We have testimony from multiple people who worked under your direction. You can cooperate and perhaps receive consideration for your honesty, or you can remain silent and face the maximum penalties. Your choice." Konaté was silent for a long time, his face unreadable. He was a careful man who had built his network on discretion and plausible deniability, but looking at the evidence spread before him, he must have realized that his usual tactics wouldn't work this time. "I want immunity," he finally said. "That's not possible for someone in your position," Sawadogo replied. "But if you provide complete and truthful cooperation, we can recommend reduced sentencing." Another long silence. Then Konaté began to talk. Over the next 6 hours, he described in detail how the network operated. He explained how he recruited traders, how he arranged for tunnel construction, how he coordinated with corrupt officials, and how he facilitated the movement of gold across international borders. He named names, provided financial details, and sketched out connections that the investigation team hadn't fully understood. Most importantly, he explained the economics. The profit margins were enormous, he said. We could pay artisanal miners below market rates, pay bribes to officials, pay for all the infrastructure and operations, and still make massive profits. The international buyers didn't ask questions because they were getting gold at prices lower than they could get through legitimate channels. Everyone in the chain was making money, except the country that actually owned the gold and the miners doing the dangerous work. When Ibrahim was briefed on Konaté's confession, he felt a mixture of satisfaction and anger. Satisfaction that they had gotten the coordinator and that he was cooperating. Anger at the sheer scale of the exploitation that had been going on, the casual way that billions in national wealth had been stolen while people like Konaté lived in comfort. What happens to him now? Ibrahim asked Colonel Sawadogo. He'll be formally charged, prosecuted, and likely spend a significant time in prison. But his cooperation will help us identify other networks that might be operating, both in Burkina Faso and in neighboring countries. Make sure his trial is public and transparent, Ibrahim said. People need to see that even sophisticated criminals who think they're untouchable can face justice. Konaté's trial, when it began 3 months later, became a media sensation. Journalists from across Africa and internationally covered the proceedings. The evidence presented was overwhelming, and Konaté's own testimony, given in exchange for a reduced sentence, provided a detailed insider's account of how criminal networks exploited weak governance and international complicity to steal resources. The trial served an educational purpose beyond just prosecuting one individual. It exposed the mechanics of resource theft, the role of corruption, and the responsibility of international actors. Civil society organizations used the trial as a case study in advocacy for stronger regulations on resource extraction and trade. Ibrahim attended several days of the trial personally, sitting in the public gallery where any citizen could see the proceedings. He wanted to demonstrate that this wasn't a show trial or political theater. It was a genuine judicial process seeking accountability for crimes against the nation. During one recess, a young journalist approached Ibrahim. "Mr. President, some critics say you're using this case to distract from other problems facing the country, the security situation, the economy, the postponed elections. How do you respond?" Ibrahim looked at the journalist for a moment before answering. "The security situation, the economy, the quality of our governance, they're all connected to whether we can control our own resources. When billions in gold revenue are being stolen instead of funding security forces, schools, hospitals, and infrastructure, that is the fundamental problem. Yes, we have other challenges, but reclaiming sovereignty over our resources is essential to addressing all of them." It was the kind of answer he gave often now, connecting the fight against corruption to broader questions of development and national autonomy. Critics might disagree with his methods or his politics, but they couldn't deny that Operation Sovereign Gold had struck at something fundamental.